The snow had already claimed 3 lives that winter, and Ophelia Zimmerman knew she would be the 4th if she did not find shelter soon. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago, which terrified her more than the pain ever had. The wind howled through the Colorado mountains like a living thing, hungry and relentless, tearing at her thin coat and whipping her dark hair across her face. She stumbled through drifts that came up to her knees, her boots long since soaked through, her breath coming in ragged gasps that burned her lungs. The late afternoon sun was already sinking behind the peaks, and she knew that once darkness fell, the cold would become truly deadly. She had been running for 2 days. Running from her uncle's house in Fairplay, running from the man he had promised her to, running from a life that would have crushed her spirit long before it killed her body. Marcus Flint was 47 years old with hands like iron and a reputation that made even hardened miners look away. Her uncle had sold her for $300 and a mining claim, and when she had begged him to reconsider, he had locked her in the root cellar until the wedding day. But Ophelia had always been clever with her hands. She had worked the lock free with a bent nail, stolen what little food she could carry, and fled into the wilderness. She had not counted on the storm. She had not counted on losing the trail. She had not counted on the vast, merciless emptiness of the Rocky Mountains in January of 1884. Her foot caught on a hidden root beneath the snow, and she went down hard. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a long moment she simply lay there, her cheek pressed against the frozen ground. It would be so easy to just close her eyes, so easy to let the cold take her. At least it would be her choice. Then she smelled smoke. The scent was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was there. Wood smoke, sharp and real. Ophelia forced herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet. Her legs shook, threatening to give out, but she made them move. One step. Another. The smoke smell grew stronger, and through the swirling snow she glimpsed a flicker of orange light. The fire burned in a small clearing, sheltered on 3 sides by towering pines and a rocky outcropping. A lean man sat beside it, his back to her, his shoulders dusted with snow. A gray horse stood hobbled nearby, and she could see the shapes of supplies covered with oiled canvas. The man wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and he seemed utterly still, as though he were part of the landscape itself. Ophelia tried to call out, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a croak. She took another step forward, and her knee buckled. She caught herself against a tree trunk, and the movement must have caught his attention because the man turned. Even through the snow and gathering darkness, she could see his eyes. They were a pale, startling blue, the color of winter sky, and they widened slightly as they took her in. He was on his feet in an instant, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "Sweet mercy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "How long have you been out here?" Ophelia tried to answer, but her legs finally gave out completely. She felt herself falling, and then strong arms caught her, easing her down. The man crouched beside her, one hand steadying her shoulder, his face creased with concern. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "Miss, can you understand what I am saying?" She managed a nod, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might shatter. "My name is Everett Young," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "You are safe now. I am going to get you warm, all right. Do not fight me." She did not have the strength to fight anything. He scooped her up as though she weighed nothing and carried her to the fire. She felt the blessed heat of it against her face, and a sound that was half sob, half moan escaped her lips. Everett set her down gently, propping her against his saddle, and immediately began unlacing her boots. "These need to come off," he said. "Your feet are frozen. This is going to hurt." He was right. As he eased the boots off, sensation began returning to her feet in waves of agony that made her cry out. Everett worked quickly, his movements sure and practiced. He pulled off her soaked stockings and began rubbing her feet with firm, steady strokes. "I know it hurts," he said, his voice gentle. "But that pain means the flesh is still alive. You are going to be all right." Tears streamed down Ophelia's face, though whether from pain, relief, or sheer exhaustion, she could not say. Everett did not seem bothered by her tears. He simply continued working, his strong hands bringing life back into her frozen limbs. After several minutes, he wrapped her feet in what looked like a spare shirt, then turned his attention to her hands. The process was just as excruciating. As feeling returned to her fingers, she whimpered, biting her lip to keep from screaming. Everett kept up a steady stream of quiet reassurance, telling her she was doing well, that she was brave, that the worst would be over soon. When he was satisfied that her extremities were recovering, he moved to the fire and returned with a tin cup filled with something that steamed in the cold air. He held it to her lips, and she tasted warm broth, rich and salty. She drank greedily, and he let her have several swallows before pulling the cup away. "Easy now," he said. "Too much too fast and you will be sick. Small sips." She wanted to argue, to gulp down the entire contents, but she knew he was right. She settled for savoring each careful sip he allowed her, feeling the warmth spread through her chest and belly. While she drank, Everett pulled a thick wool blanket from his supplies and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it carefully around her body. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Ophelia," she managed, her voice hoarse and raw. "Ophelia Zimmerman." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, you picked one hell of a day to be wandering around in a blizzard. What happened? Are you hurt anywhere besides the cold?" The concern in his voice was so genuine, so utterly without calculation, that it took her breath away. She had spent the last 5 years living with her uncle after her parents had died of influenza, and in all that time, she could not remember a single moment of genuine kindness. Her uncle had seen her as a burden, an extra mouth to feed, and then finally as a commodity to be sold. "I was running," she said, "from fair play, from a man my uncle promised me to." Something flickered in Everett's eyes, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "I see." "And this man, he was not to your liking," a bitter laugh escaped her. "He is a cruel man, everyone knows it, but my uncle did not care, he wanted the money." Everett was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "How old are you, Miss Zimmerman?" "19, she said. "In April." "19, he repeated softly. He looked away, his jaw tight. When he turned back to her, his eyes were fierce. "No one has the right to sell another person, not for any amount of money. You did right to run." The validation of her choice, spoken so matter-of-factly, made her throat tighten with emotion. She had half convinced herself that she was being foolish, selfish, ungrateful. But this stranger, this man who owed her nothing, had just told her she had done the right thing. "Thank you," she whispered. Everett shook his head. "Nothing to thank me for. Simple human decency, that is all." He glanced up at the darkening sky, where snow continued to fall in thick curtains. "This storm is going to get worse before it gets better. We need to build better shelter." "Can you stay awake while I work?" "Yes," she said, though in truth she felt as though she could sleep for a week. "Good, keep talking to me. Tell me about yourself, anything at all. I just need to know you are staying conscious." As Everett moved around the camp, gathering branches and pine boughs, Ophelia found herself talking. She told him about her parents, how her father had been a schoolteacher and her mother a seamstress. She told him about their small house in Denver, about the garden her mother had kept, about the books her father had read to her every evening. She told him about the fever that had taken them both within days of each other, about the shock of suddenly being alone at 14, about the cold reception she had received from her uncle when she had arrived in Fairplay with nothing but a small trunk of belongings. Everett listened as he worked, occasionally making sounds of acknowledgement or asking gentle questions. He moved with practiced efficiency, constructing a lean-to shelter against the rock face, layering it with pine branches and oiled canvas. By the time he was finished, full darkness had fallen, and the wind had risen to a shriek. "All right," he said, crouching beside her again. "I am going to move you into the shelter now. The fire is going to come with us. It will be tight quarters, but it will be warm." He carried her again, settling her inside the lean-to on a bed of pine branches he had covered with blankets. Then he carefully moved the fire closer, building a reflector wall of stones behind it to direct the heat into their shelter. The difference was immediate. Within the small space, protected from the wind, the temperature felt almost comfortable. Everett brought his supplies inside, arranging them efficiently around the perimeter. He worked with the easy competence of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors, and Ophelia found herself watching him with curious fascination. He was perhaps 25 or 26, she thought, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a lean, weathered face that suggested both strength and kindness. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a working man, but they had been so gentle with her. "Are you hungry?" he asked once everything was arranged to his satisfaction. "I have salt pork and beans, nothing fancy, but it is hot and filling." "I have not eaten since yesterday morning," she admitted, his expression darkened. "Then we will fix that right now." He prepared the food with the same quiet efficiency he had shown in everything else, cooking beans in a small pot over the fire and warming strips of salt pork on a flat stone. The smell made Ophelia's stomach clench with hunger, and when he handed her a tin plate, she had to resist the urge to wolf it down. "Slow," he reminded her gently. "Your stomach needs time to adjust." They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside while they sat warm and sheltered within. Ophelia could hardly believe her good fortune. If she had not stumbled across Everett's camp, she would certainly be dead by now, frozen somewhere in the wilderness. Instead, she was warm and fed and safe. "Where were you headed?" she asked when the edge had been taken off her hunger. "Before you found me, I mean." "South," Everett said, stirring the fire with a stick. "I have a ranch about 50 miles from here, up in South Park. I was coming back from Leadville where I sold some cattle. Got caught by the storm same as you, though I at least had the sense to be prepared for it." "You have a ranch," she said. "You are a cattleman." "Small operation. Just me and a couple of hired hands. We run maybe 300 head, enough to make a living but nothing fancy. It is honest work, though. I like it." There was pride in his voice, but no arrogance. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own 2 hands. "How long have you had it?" she asked. 4 years. I worked as a drover for most of my life, saved every penny I could. When a piece of land came up for sale, I scraped together enough for a down payment. Been building it up ever since." He glanced at her, and there was a hint of a smile on his lips. "It is not much, but it is mine. No one can take it from me." She heard the echo of her own fierce need for independence in his words, and something in her chest tightened. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. The storm continued through the night, but inside the lean-to, Ophelia felt warmer and safer than she had in years. Everett banked the fire and arranged their sleeping space with careful propriety, ensuring there was a respectable distance between them. He gave her his extra blanket and his spare coat, building himself a nest closer to the fire. "Try to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we will assess the situation and figure out what to do next." "Everett," she said, and he turned to look at her. "Thank you for everything, for your kindness. I know you did not have to help me." His expression was serious in the firelight. "Miss Zimmerman, any man worth the name would have done the same. The fact that you are surprised by simple decency tells me you have been around the wrong sort of people." His words stayed with her as she drifted off to sleep, wrapped in his blankets, listening to the wind howl outside. She had been around the wrong sort of people. But maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. When Ophelia woke, pale gray light was filtering through the gaps in the lean-to, and the wind had died down to a whisper. The fire had burned low, and Everett was not in the shelter. For a moment, panic seized her. Had he left? Had he decided she was too much trouble? Then the canvas flap moved aside and Everett ducked in, brushing snow from his shoulders. His cheeks were red from the cold, but his eyes were bright. "Good morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" Ophelia took stock of herself. Her feet and hands still ached, but the sharp agony had faded to a dull throb. Her body felt stiff and sore, but she was warm and alive. "Better," she said. "Much better, thanks to you. Good. The storm has passed, but it dropped at least 2 feet of snow. We are going to need to wait a day or two before we can travel. The horse cannot make it through drifts this deep while carrying riders." The thought of spending more time in this small shelter with Everett should have alarmed her, should have raised concerns about propriety and reputation. But Ophelia found she did not care. Her reputation had been ruined the moment she had fled Fairplay. Besides, Everett had been nothing but respectful. "I understand," she said. "I am sorry to be such a burden." "You are not a burden." He said it firmly, with a conviction that brooked no argument. "You are a person in need of help. There is a difference." He set about building up the fire again, then began preparing breakfast. Coffee, thick and strong and slightly bitter. More beans and some cornbread he had wrapped in cloth. It was simple food, trail food, but to Ophelia it tasted like a feast. As they ate, Everett asked her more about her situation. "This man your uncle promised you to," he said carefully. "Marcus Flint, is it?" She stared at him. "How did you know?" "I have heard of him. Has mining interests throughout the territory. Not a good man, from what I understand." His jaw tightened. "Will he come looking for you?" "I do not know," Ophelia admitted. "Maybe. Or maybe my uncle will just tell him I ran off and he will forget about me. I am not worth that much trouble." "Do not say that." Everett's voice was sharp, and she looked up in surprise. He met her gaze steadily. "Do not ever diminish your own worth. You are not a commodity. You are a human being, and you have value beyond what any man is willing to pay for you." His words struck something deep inside her, something that had been bruised and battered for so long she had almost forgotten it existed. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she looked away, embarrassed by her own emotion. "I am sorry," Everett said, his voice softening. "I did not mean to upset you. But I meant what I said. You deserve better than what you have been given." They spent the rest of the morning in quiet conversation. Everett told her about his ranch, about the 2 men who worked for him. Charlie, an older cowhand who had been with him from the beginning, and James, a young man barely 20 who was eager to learn the trade. He told her about the challenges of the work, the harsh winters and dry summers, the constant struggle against weather and predators, and simple bad luck. But he also told her about the satisfaction of seeing calves born in the spring, about riding out across land that was his, about the fierce pride of knowing he had built something lasting. In turn, Ophelia found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. About how much she missed her parents, about the loneliness of living with a man who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience. About the small rebellions she had engaged in, the way she had secretly continued her education by borrowing books from the town library, about the dreams she had harbored of one day making her own way in the world. "What would you do?" Everett asked. "If you could do anything." She considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "I would teach," she said slowly. "Like my father did. I love books, love learning. I would want to help others discover that same love." "Then you should teach," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "How?" "I have no money, no credentials, no prospects. I am a runaway with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Right now, yes," Everett agreed. "But circumstances change. People build new lives for themselves all the time out here. That is what the West is for, is it not? A place to start over." His optimism was infectious, and despite everything, Ophelia felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in her chest. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was not the end, but a beginning. The day passed in strange contentment. The storm had left them trapped in their small shelter, but Ophelia did not mind. Everett was easy company, thoughtful and intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that occasionally surprised her into laughter. He treated her with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than performative, asking her opinion on things, listening when she spoke, never talking over her or dismissing her thoughts. As afternoon faded into evening, Everett ventured out to check on his horse and gather more firewood. When he returned, his expression was thoughtful. "The weather is clearing," he said. "We should be able to travel by tomorrow afternoon, assuming no new storms blow in." "Where will we go?" Ophelia asked, and then quickly added, "Where will I go, I mean?" "You have been more than kind, but I cannot expect you to take responsibility for me." Everett settled down across from her, his blue eyes serious. "I have been thinking about that. You cannot go back to Fairplay, that much is certain. If Marcus Flint has paid for you, he will expect your uncle to make good on the deal. And if you return, your uncle will either hand you over or face consequences." Ophelia nodded. She had already reached the same conclusion. "You could come to my ranch," Everett said carefully. "Charlie's wife, Martha, lives there too. She cooks and keeps house. You would have a chaperone, so everything would be proper. You could stay until you figure out what you want to do next. We could pay you for helping Martha. It would not be much, but it would be something." The offer was so generous, so unexpected, that Ophelia found herself speechless. "Why?" she finally managed. "Why would you do that for me? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Everett said. "I know you are brave. I know you would rather risk death than accept a life of misery. I know you are intelligent and thoughtful, and I know that you deserve a chance to build the life you want, not the life someone else has chosen for you. But what if Marcus Flint comes looking for me? I would be bringing trouble to your door. Let him come." There was steel in Everett's voice. "I am not afraid of Marcus Flint or any other man who thinks he can buy a human being. If he shows up at my ranch, he will find himself very unwelcome." Ophelia looked at this man who had saved her life, who had shown her more kindness in 2 days than she had known in 5 years, and felt something shift in her chest. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A recognition, perhaps. A sense that Everett Young was the kind of man she had never quite believed existed. "I accept," she said softly. "Thank you. I will work hard, I promise. I will earn my keep." "I have no doubt of that," Everett said, and he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "Welcome to the crew, Miss Zimmerman." That night, as Ophelia lay wrapped in Everett's spare blankets, listening to his steady breathing across the fire, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hopeful. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue and the sun glinting off the fresh snow with blinding intensity. Everett was up with the dawn, breaking down the camp with practiced efficiency. He checked Ophelia's hands and feet carefully, nodding with satisfaction at her recovery. "You were lucky," he said. "Another hour or two and you would have lost fingers, maybe toes. The cold does not forgive. He had an extra pair of wool socks in his pack, and he gave them to her, along with a pair of leather gloves that were far too large but better than nothing. While she dressed, he saddled his horse, a sturdy gray gelding with intelligent eyes. "His name is Granite," Everett said, stroking the horse's neck. "Tough as the stone he is named for and twice as stubborn, but he will get us home." Getting Ophelia onto the horse proved to be a challenge. Her body was still stiff and sore, and it took several attempts before she was settled in the saddle. Everett swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her, and clicked his tongue. Granite moved forward, picking his way carefully through the deep snow. The journey was slow and arduous. The snow came up to Granite's chest in places, and even the sturdy horse struggled. But Everett was patient, letting the animal rest frequently, never pushing too hard. He kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling stories about the region, keeping Ophelia's spirits up. As they descended from the high country, the snow grew shallower and their progress increased. They passed through stands of pine and aspen, across frozen meadows where deer tracks crisscrossed in delicate patterns. Once, they saw a distant line of elk moving across a ridge, their breath steaming in the cold air. "It is beautiful," Ophelia said, and meant it. Despite everything she had been through, despite the fear and cold and exhaustion, she could still appreciate the stark majesty of this landscape. "It is," Everett agreed, his voice close to her ear. "Harsh but beautiful. Sometimes I think that is the only way things worth having can be. There has to be some struggle to make the reward meaningful." She thought about his words as they rode. Was that true? Did suffering give meaning to joy? Or was that just something people told themselves to make sense of hardship? They stopped for a brief midday meal, and Everett built a small fire to warm them. As they ate, he became more serious. "I need to tell you something about the ranch," he said. "About why I am out here alone instead of with my men." Ophelia waited, sensing this was important. "4 months ago, my brother died," Everett said, his voice flat. "His name was Samuel. He was helping me drive cattle to market when we got caught in a stampede. His horse went down and he was trampled. By the time we got to him, there was nothing anyone could do." "Oh, Everett," Ophelia breathed, "I am so sorry. He was 3 years younger than me, 22, had his whole life ahead of him." Everett stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "After it happened, I could not stand to be around people for a while. I needed time alone, time to think. So I left Charlie and James to handle the ranch while I made the cattle sail myself. I have been gone for 2 weeks. Do they know you are all right?" she asked. "I sent word from Leadville." "They should not be worried." He looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "I am telling you this because when we get to the ranch, I may not be the best company. I am still grieving. Some days are harder than others. I wanted you to understand that before you agreed to come." Ophelia reached out and placed her hand over his. The gesture felt natural, right? "Thank you for telling me. I understand grief. I lost both my parents. I know how it can come in waves, how some days you can almost forget and other days it is all you can think about." Everett turned his hand over, clasping hers gently. "Then you understand why I need you to be patient with me." "I will be," she promised. "We will be patient with each other." They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. The buildings emerged from the dusk like something out of a dream. A sturdy log house with smoke rising from the chimney, a large barn, several outbuildings, and corrals where cattle clustered together for warmth. As they approached, the door to the house flew open, and a woman rushed out, followed by 2 men. The woman was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun and a face that had seen both hardship and joy. She let out a cry of relief when she saw Everett. "Thank the Lord," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We have been worried sick." "I am fine, Martha," Everett said, dismounting and then reaching up to help Ophelia down. "I am sorry to have caused concern. The storm caught me and I had to wait it out." The older man, who must be Charlie, stepped forward. He was weathered and lean, with kind eyes and a graying mustache. "We got your message from Leadville, but when the storm hit, we feared the worst." "I found shelter," Everett said. He gestured to Ophelia, who stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly very conscious of how she must look. Bedraggled, wearing ill-fitting clothes, a stranger appearing out of nowhere. "This is Miss Ophelia Zimmerman. I found her in the mountains, half frozen. She's going to be staying with us for a while, helping Martha around the house." Martha's sharp eyes took Ophelia in with a single glance, but her expression was kind. "Well, you poor dear. Come inside this instant. You look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bed." The younger man, James, took Granite's reins, and Charlie helped Everett with the supplies. Martha ushered Ophelia into the house with a firm but gentle hand, clucking like a mother hen. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table surrounded by chairs. There were 2 doors leading to other rooms, presumably bedrooms. Everything was clean and well-maintained, with feminine touches that spoke of Martha's care. Curtains at the windows, a rag rug on the floor, wildflowers preserved in a jar on the table. "Sit, sit," Martha commanded, pulling out a chair. "I will get you something warm to drink." Ophelia sank into the chair gratefully, her body aching from hours in the saddle. Within moments, Martha had pressed a cup of hot tea into her hands and was bustling about, preparing food. Everett came in a few minutes later, stamping snow from his boots. He had removed his heavy coat, and Ophelia saw him properly for the first time in good light. He was taller than she had realized, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with the kind of quiet strength that came from years of hard physical work. His face was handsome in an unassuming way, with strong features and those striking blue eyes. He caught her looking and smiled slightly, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away quickly, focusing on her tea. Charlie and James joined them, and Martha served up a meal of venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. The conversation flowed around Ophelia, warm and easy. Charlie and James filled Everett in on the ranch business, and Martha shared local news. Occasionally, someone would direct a question or comment to Ophelia, including her in the circle, making her feel welcome. After dinner, Martha showed Ophelia to a small bedroom off the main room. "This was Samuel's room," she said quietly. "Everett said it could be yours, at least for now. I hope you will be comfortable here." The room was simple: a bed with a quilted coverlet, a dresser, a small table with a lamp. But to Ophelia, who had been sleeping on a straw pallet in her uncle's drafty attic, it looked like luxury. "It is perfect," she said, her throat tight. "Thank you." Martha patted her hand. "We are glad to have you, dear. Any woman brave enough to face down a Colorado blizzard is welcome here." She paused, then added gently, "Everett told us a little bit about your situation. You do not need to worry. You are safe here." When Martha had gone, Ophelia sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since she had fled Fairplay. She cried for her lost parents, for the years of loneliness and fear, for the close brush with death in the mountains. But she also cried with relief, with gratitude, with the overwhelming sense that maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally turned. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and quiet contentment. Ophelia threw herself into helping Martha, eager to earn her keep and prove her worth. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and learned to churn butter and bake bread. Martha was a patient teacher, and the work was satisfying in a way Ophelia had never experienced before. This was not drudgery performed out of obligation. This was contribution to a household that valued her efforts. In the evenings, she would sit with the others around the fire, listening to their stories, occasionally sharing her own. Everett was often quiet, his grief a palpable presence, but he seemed to appreciate the company. Sometimes, late at night, Ophelia would hear him moving around outside, and she knew he was walking off his sorrow under the stars. As winter deepened, Ophelia found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to read the weather, to understand the needs of the animals, to appreciate the small victories that came with each day. And she found herself watching Everett, drawn to his quiet strength, his fundamental decency, the glimpses of humor that occasionally broke through his grief. He fascinated her, not just because he was handsome, though he was in a rugged, unpolished way, but because of the person he was. He treated everyone around him with respect, from the youngest ranch hand to the oldest cattle. He worked harder than anyone, never asking someone to do something he would not do himself. And he had a way of making people feel seen, truly seen in a way that was rare and precious. Ophelia knew she was developing feelings for him, feelings that went beyond gratitude. But she kept them tightly locked away. Everett had saved her out of kindness, not because he was interested in her romantically. He had given her a place to stay, a chance to find her feet. The last thing she wanted to do was make things awkward by revealing inappropriate emotions. Besides, he was grieving. He needed a friend, not a woman throwing herself at him. One afternoon in late February, Ophelia was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Everett came in from the cold, his cheeks red and his eyes bright. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, and she noticed he was still being formal, still maintaining proper distance. "I wonder if I might have a word with you." "Of course," she said, wiping flour from her hands. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. I just wanted to discuss your plans. You have been here for 6 weeks now, and while you are welcome to stay as long as you like, I thought perhaps you might want to think about your future." The words hit her like a physical blow. He wanted her to leave. Of course he did. She had overstayed her welcome, become a burden. She forced herself to smile to keep her voice steady. "I understand," she said. "I have been thinking about it. Perhaps I could find work in one of the larger towns, as a seamstress maybe, or a shop girl." Everett frowned. "That is not what I meant. You misunderstand me." "Then what did you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I meant that you had mentioned wanting to teach. There is a schoolhouse in South Park about 10 miles from here. The previous teacher left to get married, and they have been looking for a replacement. I thought perhaps you might be interested." Hope flared in Ophelia's chest. "A teaching position. But I have no formal credentials, no experience. You have education. You love books and learning. From what you have told me, you know mathematics and history and literature. That is more than most people out here can claim." He met her eyes. "I spoke to the school board, told them about you. They said if you are willing to take an examination to prove your knowledge, they would consider hiring you. You did that." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "You advocated for me." "Of course I did. You said teaching was your dream. If I can help make that dream possible, why would I not?" Because no one had ever done anything like that for her before. Because kindness like this was so rare, so precious, that she hardly knew how to accept it. "I would love to take the examination," she said. "When can it be arranged?" "Next week, if the weather holds. The school board chairman lives in South Park. I can take you there, introduce you properly." "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. "Thank you so much, Everett." He smiled, and it transformed his face, chasing away some of the sadness that had haunted him. "You are welcome, Ophelia." It was the first time he had used her first name, and the sound of it in his low voice made her heart skip a beat. The examination took place the following week in a small office above the general store in South Park. Ophelia sat at a scarred wooden desk, while three stern-faced men asked her questions about literature, mathematics, history, and geography. She answered as best she could, drawing on her father's teachings and her own extensive reading. When it was over, the men conferred in low voices while Ophelia sat with her hands clenched in her lap, hardly daring to breathe. Everett waited outside, pacing in the cold, his own tension evident. Finally, the chairman, a distinguished gentleman named Mr. Yates, turned to her with a smile. "Miss Zimmerman, we are pleased to offer you the position of schoolteacher, beginning in March. The salary is $30 a month plus room and board in the teacherage. Does this sound acceptable?" "Yes," Ophelia breathed. "Yes, thank you, I accept." When she emerged from the office, Everett took one look at her face and grinned. "You got it." "I got it." She felt dizzy with joy, with disbelief. "I am going to be a teacher. You are going to be a wonderful teacher." On impulse, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. For a moment he stiffened in surprise, but then his arms came around her, holding her close. She felt the solid warmth of him, the strength in his embrace, and something in her chest cracked open. When she pulled back, they stood for a moment just looking at each other. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. Then Everett cleared his throat and stepped back, and the moment passed. "We should celebrate," he said. "There is a decent restaurant in town. Let me buy you lunch." The meal was simple but delicious, and they lingered over it, talking and laughing. Ophelia felt lighter than she had in years, as though a weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. She had a future. She had a purpose. She had, against all odds, found a place where she belonged. March arrived with a false spring, warm days that melted the snow and turned the roads to mud. Ophelia prepared to move to the teacherage, which was a small cabin adjacent to the schoolhouse. Martha helped her pack her few belongings and gave her a warm quilt and a basket of preserves. "You come visit us," Martha said firmly. "You are part of this family now, and we take care of our own." Charlie and James echoed the sentiment, and Everett helped her load her things into the wagon. The drive to the schoolhouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Everett carried her belongings inside and helped her arrange the small cabin. It was simple but clean, with a wood stove, a bed, a table, and a few chairs. There were shelves for books and a small pantry. Through the window, Ophelia could see the schoolhouse waiting for her. "You will do great," Everett said when everything was arranged. "Those children are lucky to have you. I hope I can live up to their expectations." "You will." He hesitated, then added, "I will miss having you at the ranch. It has been nice having you there. The place has felt more like a home these past weeks than it has in a long time." His words made her heart ache. "I will miss you too," she said softly. "All of you. But I will visit, like Martha said, and you are welcome here any time. I will take you up on that." He lingered for a moment longer, as though wanting to say something more, but then he simply tipped his hat and left. Ophelia watched him drive away, fighting the urge to call him back. Teaching proved to be everything Ophelia had dreamed and more. Her students ranged in age from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and miners, eager for knowledge. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and history, and she loved every moment of it. The work was challenging, demanding all her energy and creativity, but it was deeply fulfilling. True to his word, Everett visited regularly. He would appear at the schoolhouse in the late afternoon, ostensibly to check on her safety, but he would stay for dinner and conversation. They fell into an easy rhythm, and Ophelia found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with friendship. She was in love with him. She could no longer deny it. She loved his quiet strength, his fundamental goodness, the way he treated her as an equal. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he listened when she talked about her students, the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. But she said nothing. Everett had given her so much already. To ask for more, to burden him with her feelings when he was still grieving his brother, seemed selfish and wrong. Spring turned to summer and the landscape burst into life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the days grew long and warm. Ophelia's students thrived and she felt a deep pride in their progress. The community embraced her and she began to feel truly at home. One Saturday in late June, Everett arrived at the teacherage with a picnic basket and a proposition. "It is a beautiful day," he said. "Too beautiful to spend indoors. Come with me. I want to show you something." They rode out across the rolling hills, the sun warm on their faces and the wind sweet with the scent of sage and wildflowers. Everett led her to a high meadow overlooking a valley where his cattle grazed peacefully. They spread a blanket under a stand of aspens and shared the lunch Martha had packed: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and strawberries. "I have been thinking," Everett said as they ate, "about Samuel, about what he would want for me." Ophelia waited, sensing he needed to work through his thoughts. "He would want me to be happy," Everett continued. "He would want me to live fully, not to spend the rest of my life mourning him. I know that. But for a long time I felt like being happy would be a betrayal somehow. Like I did not have the right to move forward when he could not." "That is natural," Ophelia said gently. "Grief is complicated." "It is. But lately I have realized something. Samuel loved life. He lived every day to the fullest, never holding back. And the best way I can honor his memory is to do the same. To embrace the opportunities I have been given, to take chances, to not waste the time I have." He turned to her, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Ophelia, these past months, getting to know you, watching you build a life for yourself, seeing your strength and courage and kindness, it has changed me. You have changed me, and I realize that I have been a coward." "What do you mean?" "I have been telling myself that I should not have feelings for you, that you deserve better than a grieving rancher with a modest spread and an uncertain future. That you came to me for help, not for romance, and I would be taking advantage to pursue anything more." Ophelia's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Everett, but the truth is, I have fallen in love with you. I think I started falling that first night in the mountains, when you were so brave and determined despite your fear. And every day since I have fallen a little bit more. I love your intelligence, your compassion, your fierce independence. I love the way you light up when you talk about your students. I love your laugh, your courage, your fundamental goodness." He took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You have built a life here, a good life, and I would never want to interfere with that. But I cannot keep these feelings locked away any longer. I love you, Ophelia. And if there is any chance that you might feel the same way, I would be the happiest man alive." For a moment, Ophelia could not speak. Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Then she laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and threw her arms around his neck. "You foolish man," she said, her eyes bright with tears. "Of course I feel the same way. I have been in love with you for months. I just did not think you could ever see me as anything more than the woman you rescued." Everett pulled back just enough to look at her face, his expression wonderstruck. "You love me, with all my heart." He kissed her then, a kiss that was gentle and reverent and full of promise. Ophelia melted into it, feeling as though every moment of her life had been leading to this. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Marry me," Everett said. "I know it is sudden, and I know you have your teaching position, but we can make it work. You can keep teaching if you want. I will support whatever you decide. I just want to spend my life with you." "Yes," Ophelia said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They spent the rest of the afternoon in that meadow, talking and planning and dreaming. They would marry in the fall after the school term ended for the summer. Ophelia would continue teaching, riding the 10 miles to the schoolhouse several days a week. It would be challenging, but they would make it work. "I never thought I could be this happy," Ophelia confessed, as they lay side by side on the blanket, watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "When I was running through that blizzard, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was actually just beginning." "We both got a second chance," Everett said, lacing his fingers through hers, "and I intend to make the most of it." News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Martha cried tears of joy and immediately began planning the wedding. Charlie and James congratulated Everett with hearty handshakes and knowing grins. The school board assured Ophelia that her marriage would not affect her position, a progressive stance that made her grateful all over again for this community that had embraced her. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Everett courted her properly, with rides in the country, dinners at the ranch, and long conversations under the stars. He brought her wildflowers and books, listened to her dreams, and shared his own. They talked about the future, about the ranch, about the children they might have someday. Ophelia had never been so happy. Every morning she woke up amazed at the turn her life had taken. The scared, desperate girl who had fled into a blizzard seemed like someone from another lifetime. In September, on a day when the aspen trees had turned gold and the air held the first hint of autumn, Ophelia and Everett were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Martha had decorated the barn with wildflowers and ribbons, and neighbors from miles around came to witness their union. Ophelia wore a dress Martha had helped her make, simple but beautiful, the white fabric gleaming in the afternoon light. Everett wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with joy. When he took her hands and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to cherish you, to support you, to stand beside you in all things. I promise to honor your independence and celebrate your strength. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life." Ophelia's own vows were equally heartfelt. "You saved my life in that blizzard, but you did more than that. You showed me what kindness looks like, what true respect and partnership can be. You gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be. I promise to love you, to support you, to build a life with you based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. I promise to be your partner in all things, for as long as we both live." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Everett kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. The gathered crowd cheered, and Martha openly wept with joy. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful, with good food, music, and dancing. Ophelia danced with Everett, with Charlie, with James, with neighbors she had come to know and respect. She felt surrounded by love, by community, by the sense that she had truly found where she belonged. As the sun set and the stars emerged, Everett took her hand and led her away from the party, toward the house that was now their home. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to navigate the rhythms of shared life. Ophelia continued teaching, and Everett supported her fully, often helping her prepare lessons in the evenings. She learned the ins and outs of ranch management, understanding the cycles of the cattle business, the challenges of weather and market prices. They had their disagreements, as all couples do. Everett could be stubborn, and Ophelia had a fierce, independent streak that sometimes clashed with his protective instincts. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to approach problems as partners rather than adversaries. In the spring of 1886, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and anticipation. Ophelia continued teaching through the early months, finally stepping down in late summer as her pregnancy advanced. Their son was born in October, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Samuel, after Everett's brother, and Ophelia saw the way her husband's eyes filled with tears when he first held his namesake. "Samuel would have loved him," Everett whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He always said he wanted to be an uncle." "He would have been a wonderful uncle," Ophelia agreed, her own eyes bright. "And we will make sure young Samuel knows about the brave, vibrant man he was named for." Motherhood was both harder and more rewarding than Ophelia had anticipated. The long nights, the constant demands, the fierce love that made her heart ache with its intensity. But she cherished every moment, and Everett was a devoted father, rising with her for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his low, rumbling voice. When Samuel was a year old, Ophelia returned to teaching part-time, with Martha caring for the baby on the days she worked. It was an arrangement that worked well for everyone, allowing Ophelia to pursue her passion while also being present for her son. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. A daughter arrived 3 years after Samuel, a tiny girl with Ophelia's dark hair and quick mind. They named her Rose, and she proved to be as fierce and independent as her mother. Another son followed 2 years later, whom they named Thomas, and he had his father's quiet steadiness. The ranch prospered under Everett's careful management, and they were able to expand their operations, hiring more hands and increasing their herd. Ophelia became known throughout the region as an excellent teacher, and several of her students went on to attend university, a rare achievement for the time and place. Through it all, Ophelia and Everett's love deepened and matured. The passionate romance of their early days settled into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. They still had their disagreements, still faced challenges and hardships. But they faced them together, drawing strength from each other. One evening, when Ophelia was 40 and Everett 47, they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their children were grown now, Samuel working the ranch alongside his father, Rose teaching in Denver, and Thomas studying law in Colorado Springs. "You ever think about that blizzard?" Everett asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how easily things could have gone differently?" "Sometimes," Ophelia admitted. "If I had not found your fire, if you had been a different kind of man, if any number of things had been different, we would not be here now. I think about it too, about how close I came to losing you before I ever knew you." He pulled her closer. "You were the bravest person I had ever met, risking death rather than accepting a life of misery." "I was desperate," she corrected gently. "But you were kind. You showed me that there were still good people in the world, that not everyone was cruel or selfish. You gave me hope when I had none left." "We saved each other," Everett said. "You gave me a reason to live fully again, to embrace joy instead of drowning in grief. You brought light back into my life." Ophelia thought about the life they had built together. The home filled with love and laughter, the children they had raised, the community they had contributed to. She thought about the students she had taught, the knowledge she had shared, the impact she had made. "I never imagined I could have a life like this," she said softly. "Back when I was living in my uncle's house, counting down the days until I would be sold to Marcus Flint, I could not conceive of being this happy, this fulfilled." "What do you think happened to him?" Everett asked. "To Marcus Flint, I mean. We never heard anything." "I heard he died a few years back," Ophelia said. "Mining accident, they said, though some claimed he had made too many enemies and someone finally decided to settle scores. I do not know if that is true, but I know I do not mourn him. Your uncle, dead as well. Last I heard, he drank himself into an early grave." There was no satisfaction in her voice, just a quiet statement of fact. "I hope he found some peace before the end, though I doubt he did." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Ophelia reflected on the strange path her life had taken. If someone had told that frightened 19-year-old girl, stumbling through a blizzard, that she would end up here, married to a good man, with 3 wonderful children and a career she loved, she would never have believed them. "I love you," she said, turning to Everett. "I know I say it often, but I want you to know I mean it every single time. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you are mine," Everett replied, kissing her forehead. "My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife. I thank God for that blizzard every day, because it brought you to me." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, Ophelia felt profound gratitude, not just for Everett, though he was the center of her world, but for the courage that had carried her through that blizzard, for the kindness of strangers who had become family, for the opportunities that had allowed her to become who she was meant to be. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the grief and fear, the desperate flight, the numbing cold, and then the fire in the darkness, the strong arms that had caught her, the gentle voice that had promised she was safe. She thought about the weeks that had followed, learning to trust again, finding her footing, discovering that there was still goodness in the world. The path had not always been easy. There had been challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But through it all, she had never regretted her choice to run into that blizzard. Because that choice, that desperate gamble, had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life. Winter came again, as it always did in the Colorado high country, but Ophelia no longer feared it. Let the snow fall and the wind howl. She was warm and safe, surrounded by love, living a life she had built with her own 2 hands and the support of a man who saw her as an equal partner. She had been trapped by winter once, frightened and alone. But she had found more than shelter at that fire in the wilderness. She had found kindness, hope, and eventually, a love that transformed her entire world. And that, Ophelia thought as she leaned against her husband's shoulder, was a story worth living. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons. Samuel married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a strong-willed young woman named Catherine who fit seamlessly into the family. They gave Ophelia and Everett their first grandchildren, twin boys with boundless energy who kept everyone on their toes. Rose, true to her independent nature, married a fellow teacher she had met in Denver. Together, they opened a school for children of miners and railroad workers, providing education to those who might otherwise have gone without. Ophelia visited them when she could, proud beyond words of the work her daughter was doing. Thomas, after completing his law studies, returned to Colorado and set up practice in Fairplay. It was a strange full circle, Ophelia thought, that her son should build his life in the town she had once fled in terror. But Fairplay in the late 1890s was a different place than it had been in 1884, more civilized, more forward-thinking. And Thomas, with his father's integrity and his mother's sharp mind, quickly became one of the most respected attorneys in the region. Everett and Ophelia settled into the comfortable rhythms of middle age. Their hair turned gray, their bodies moved a bit slower, but their love remained as strong as ever. They took particular joy in their grandchildren, spoiling them shamelessly and delighting in watching the next generation grow. On their 20th anniversary, Everett surprised Ophelia with a gift, a new school building constructed on their ranch property. "For the children of the ranch hands," he explained, "and for anyone else in the area who needs education. I thought you might like to teach again, just a few students on your own terms." Ophelia was speechless. The building was beautiful, with large windows to let in light, a good stove, desks built by Everett's own hands, and shelves waiting to be filled with books. "You built me a school," she finally managed, tears streaming down her face. "You told me once that teaching was your dream," Everett said, taking her hands. "You have done it for years, touched so many lives. But I wanted you to have a school that was entirely yours, where you could teach exactly as you wanted, without answering to a school board or worrying about budgets. It is the most wonderful gift anyone has ever given me," Ophelia said, kissing him. "Except for the gift you gave me 20 years ago when you saved my life and showed me what true kindness looked like." The school became Ophelia's joy in her later years. She taught children of ranch workers, children of passing travelers, children whose parents could not afford formal schooling elsewhere. She taught them reading and writing, mathematics and science, but also kindness and courage and the importance of thinking for themselves. Everett remained active in the ranch operations well into his 60s, though he gradually turned more responsibility over to Samuel. He took pleasure in his work, but also made time for the things that mattered most: his wife, his children, his grandchildren. He never forgot the lessons his own brother's death had taught him about the fragility of life and the importance of living fully. When Ophelia turned 60 in 1910, the family gathered for a celebration. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children, along with Martha and Charlie, who had both become beloved fixtures of the family. James had moved on years before to start his own ranch, but he sent his regards along with a beautiful saddle he had crafted himself. As Ophelia looked around the table at the faces of those she loved, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This family, this life, this love, it was all so far beyond anything she had ever imagined for herself. "Speech," called Samuel, raising his glass. "Mother should give a speech." Ophelia stood, a bit unsteady after the wine they had shared with dinner. She looked at each face in turn, her children, grown and successful and good. Her grandchildren, full of promise and possibility. Her husband, still handsome to her eyes, still the man who had saved her life all those years ago. "I do not have much to say that you do not already know," she began. "Except that I love you all so much it sometimes hurts, and I want you to remember always that the choices we make matter. 26 years ago, I made a choice to run into a blizzard rather than accept a life I did not want. It was a terrifying choice, and I nearly died because of it. But that choice led me to your father and to all of this. It led me to a life I never could have imagined." She turned to Everett, who was watching her with eyes full of love. "You showed me what kindness looks like. You gave me shelter from the storm, not just that first night, but every day since. You have been my partner, my friend, my love, and I am grateful for every single day we have had together." "To Ophelia," Everett said, raising his glass, "the bravest, most brilliant woman I have ever known, and to all of us, for the family we have built together." "To family," the others echoed, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the room. That night, as they prepared for bed, Everett said quietly, "You know, I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I had not found you that day. If I had camped somewhere else, if the wind had blown differently, if any small thing had changed." "Do you?" Ophelia asked, brushing out her long gray hair. "I think I would have survived," he said slowly. "I would have run the ranch, probably married eventually out of loneliness or practicality, but I would never have known what real love feels like. I would never have known what it meant to be truly happy." "I feel the same way," Ophelia said. "You saved my life in the most literal sense, but you also gave me a life worth living. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You supported my dreams, celebrated my successes, stood by me through challenges. That kind of partnership, that kind of love, it is rare and precious." "We are lucky," Everett agreed. "We are," Ophelia said, climbing into bed beside him. "But I also think we worked for this. We chose each other every day. We chose to communicate, to compromise, to see the best in each other even when things were hard. That was not luck. That was effort and commitment and love." Everett pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season. But inside they were warm and safe, surrounded by the life they had built together. The years continued their steady march. Everett's health began to decline in his early 70s, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. He moved slower, tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp, and his love for Ophelia never wavered. They spent their days quietly, reading together by the fire, taking short walks around the property, playing with great-grandchildren who were now beginning to arrive. Samuel ran the ranch with his sons, and Ophelia had finally retired from teaching, though she still tutored individual students who came seeking her help. One evening in the spring of 1918, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Everett said, "I've had a good life." Something in his tone made Ophelia turn to look at him sharply. "You sound like you are saying goodbye." "Not yet," he said, taking her hand. "But someday. And when that day comes, I want you to know that I have no regrets. These years with you have been the best of my life. You made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Stop talking like that," Ophelia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are not going anywhere." "Not today," he agreed. "But I am 73 years old, my love. The time will come. And when it does, I need you to promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. You have so much still to give, so much wisdom to share. Do not let grief consume you the way it nearly consumed me before you came into my life." Tears were streaming down Ophelia's face. "How can you ask me that? You are my whole world." "No," Everett said gently. "I am part of your world, an important part, but you are also a teacher, a mother, a grandmother, a friend. You are so many things beyond just my wife, and all those parts of you will still exist even after I am gone." "I cannot think about this," Ophelia said. "I will not." "All right," Everett said, pulling her close. "We will not speak of it again. Let us just enjoy the time we have." Everett lived for 3 more years, declining gradually but peacefully. He died in his sleep in the summer of 1921, with Ophelia beside him and all 3 of their children in the house. He was 76 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Ophelia grieved deeply, as she had known she would. The man who had saved her life, who had shown her what love could be, who had been her partner for more than 3 decades, was gone. The loss felt immeasurable, but she remembered her promise. She remembered Everett's words about really living. And slowly, with the support of her children and grandchildren, she began to rebuild her life around the hole his absence had left. She returned to teaching, working with great-grandchildren and their friends in the little school Everett had built for her. She wrote down her life story, wanting future generations to know about the journey that had brought her from that blizzard to this life. She remained active in her community, supporting education initiatives and advocating for women's rights. Ophelia lived to the age of 84, clear-minded and active until the very end. She died peacefully in 1935, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Her last words were of Everett, calling his name as though she could see him waiting for her. At her funeral, Thomas read from the memoir she had written. He read about the scared 19-year-old girl running through a blizzard, about the fire in the darkness, and the kind cowboy who had offered shelter. He read about the love that had grown between them, about the life they had built together, about the family that had resulted from one act of simple human kindness. "My mother wanted us to remember," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "that the choices we make in moments of crisis define who we become. She chose to run rather than accept a life of misery. My father chose to show kindness to a stranger. And those two choices, made in a blizzard more than 50 years ago, led to all of this, to all of us." He gestured to the assembled family, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. More than 70 people, all descended from a cowboy and a scared young woman who had found each other in a winter storm. "They showed us what real love looks like," Thomas continued. "Not the passionate romance of novels, though they had that too, but the everyday love of partnership, of choosing each other again and again, of building a life together based on mutual respect and genuine care. They showed us that kindness matters, that courage matters, that the way we treat each other shapes the world we leave behind." Samuel stood and added his own words. "My father told me once that finding my mother was like finding the missing piece of himself. He said that before her, he had been living a half-life, going through the motions. But she brought color and joy and meaning to everything. And my mother said the same of him. They completed each other." Rose spoke last, her voice steady despite her tears. "They taught me that a woman can be both independent and partnered, that she does not have to choose between personal dreams and family. My mother was a teacher, a wife, a mother, a friend, a community leader. She was fully herself always, and my father supported every part of who she was. That is the legacy they left us. Be fully yourself, love generously, treat others with kindness, and build something lasting." As Ophelia was laid to rest beside Everett, her great-grandson, a boy of 12, stood beside his father and said, "Will you tell me again about the blizzard, about how they met?" And his father smiled through his tears and began the story. It was the winter of 1884, and a scared young woman was running for her life. The story of Ophelia and Everett lived on, passed down through generations. It became family legend, the tale of how kindness in a winter storm had led to a great love that shaped an entire family. Great-great-grandchildren told it to their own children, embellishing here and there perhaps, but keeping the core truth intact. That one man's choice to show compassion to a stranger had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The ranch remained in the family, worked by Everett's descendants. The little school Ophelia had taught in was eventually moved and preserved as a historical site, a testament to one woman's dedication to education. And in Fairplay, a plaque was placed in the town square, commemorating Ophelia Zimmerman Young as one of the region's pioneering educators. But more than any physical memorial, the true legacy of Ophelia and Everett lived on in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren. Courage in the face of adversity, kindness to those in need, respect for every person's inherent worth and dignity. And above all, the understanding that love, real love, is built on partnership, communication, and daily choices to cherish and support each other. The blizzard that had nearly killed Ophelia had instead given her life. The cowboy who had offered her shelter at his fire had offered her so much more: hope, partnership, love, and a future brighter than anything she had dared to dream. And in the end, is that not what we all hope for? To find someone who sees us truly, who offers us shelter from life's storms, who helps us become who we were meant to be. Ophelia and Everett had found that in each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story ended as all stories must. But the love they shared, the family they created, the values they lived by, those things continued on, rippling outward through time, touching lives they would never know, creating a legacy that would never truly die. In a world that could be harsh and cruel, especially in the rough and tumble days of the Old West, they had proven that kindness and love could not only survive but flourish. They had shown that one person's compassion could change another person's entire world. And they had demonstrated that true partnership, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, could weather any storm. The scared girl in the blizzard had become a beloved matriarch. The grieving cowboy had become a devoted husband and father. Together, they had built something remarkable, not through grand gestures or dramatic deeds, but through the quiet, steady work of loving each other well, day after day, year after year. And that, perhaps, is the greatest love story of all.